So we had a bit of fun with that face covering quiz. And I'm not sure about you, but even today, I was looking at as people came in, I was like, so who's that then? I don't have a clue who that is. And then as I stared at them, I was like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so, and that's so-and-so. It's so easy to do that we don't actually fully know who people are when a whole portion of our face is covered. And I'm not sure about you, but I've had this quite often growing up, that people have known me from when I was a little child. And I don't have a clue who they are, but they know everything about me, seemingly. And I just have to guess how they know me, where they know me from. And that is quite fun. But eventually, I do get some idea. And then we can have something bigger, of a fuller conversation. And I think that is a lot of what the disciples were looking at, as we have just read, when they were out fishing. Look, and Jesus appears. This, in context, as a passage of scripture, is the epilogue to John's Gospel, him summing up and just creating an ending for the story of Jesus that John wanted to tell. We don't really know how much time has passed since the resurrection account that we looked at a couple of weeks ago from John 20. We don't really know the time scale. All we know is that if we marry in the other gospel accounts in Matthew and Mark, that the disciples were told to go to Galilee and wait for Jesus there. So if we take that into account, they were obedient, went to Galilee, and were waiting. They were in this place of limbo. They were told to go to Galilee, they were told to wait, but they didn't know how long for. They didn't know what they were waiting for. They knew that Jesus was alive. They had seen him already in Jerusalem in the upper room, but they didn't know what was going to come from it. We're really blessed that we have this thing of hindsight, that we know Pentecost. We know 2,000 years later after this that we are here, sat here, because of all they did for Jesus. We know that, but they didn't. And I'm not sure about you, but when we're in this place of confusion, I strive for what is familiar, what is comfortable, things that I can control. This last year in lockdown, where we haven't had a clue what is going on, I'm sure we've all had our own little coping mechanisms of things that we do, whether that's baking or rewatching a television show that we love, or playing music that feels just comfortable and reminds us of home. I'm not sure what you do. But for the disciples, many of them who were former fishers, they decide to go fishing. This would have been their job, their day in, day out, bread and butter earning way of life before Jesus came along. And when they're in Galilee, they might as well go back to it, really. And so they do. They go to what is comfortable, what is familiar, and it helps pass the time of waiting. And I'm sure for you and for me, with our things that we've gotten to that are familiar, it's just helped pass this last year and get us in some kind of way of coping with all of the uncertainty and the limbo that this lockdown has thrown at us. They went to a situation that they knew in a time that was very uncertain. When they were fishing, they caught nothing. This was a common occurrence for those fishing on the Sea of Galilee, but it isn't like, even though it was common, it still would have been really frustrating for them. A wasted evening, a wasted time. Yet Jesus, who I think is quite funny, really, because Jesus was a carpenter. So what on earth did he know about fishing? Yeah, he gives fishing advice and they suddenly have this great haul of fish. I find it quite amusing. But anyway, Jesus comes and gives a command. The disciples obey it, and they suddenly have more fish than they can count, 153 as we read later on in John 21. However, in all of this, that is when they recognised who Jesus was. In the obeying of what he says, they recognised. Now, the commentators are a bit confused and they like to debate and discuss what actually happened. For some, they just think the sun was slightly higher in the sky so they could see Jesus more clearly, which is one way of explaining it. But another way is that this whole story and event very much mirrors the initial call of the disciples found in other Gospels. The disciples were there, they were fishing, catching fish. Jesus comes along, tells them to throw it on the other side, they catch fish, they decide to leave their jobs and follow him. They go back to that, and Jesus does it all again. Maybe that's the reason that they recognised him. And realistically, it doesn't really matter why or how this happened. All that matters is that it did. However, this is where the challenge comes in for us today. We don't know how many fishing trips the disciples had been on at this point. For all we know, this could have been 2 weeks of them going out every day. They would have got into a routine, they would have got used to the lack of sleep. And because of this, they could have got so used to this new lifestyle that they missed out on the adventures that Jesus wanted for them. For us today, our comfortable things, we could get so stuck in seeking after the comfortable and the familiar that we miss out on seeking after Jesus. The comfortable and the familiar is not sinful, unless it is. And in that way, then, we need to change. But we need to make sure that what gives us comfort, what gives us just that sense of peace, doesn't mean that we miss out on the resurrected Jesus. And for many of us, this seeking after Jesus doesn't change our external things. For many people, when they came to know Jesus and have a relationship with him, their job didn't change, their location didn't change. Things of life stayed the same. For some of us, their life with Jesus has changed everything. No matter what happens, we need to make sure that when we seek after Jesus, that we follow him when he calls. In the place of limbo, we can be quite easy to go back to what is familiar and we miss out on the adventures that Jesus has for us. As I've already said, we've got 2,000 years of Christian history, which is purely based on these people with a few extras who weren't present at that time, doing as Jesus said, following him again. Who knows what would happen with you and with me if we do the same? God can do amazing things through the lives of each and every one of us. When we seek after the comfortable and the familiar, which, let's face it, for many of us, being here this morning is a comfortable, familiar thing. But let's not get so stuck in seeking after that we miss out on the Jesus who is calling us into a life beyond what we have right now. The question, really, I have, is when Jesus calls. When Jesus calls, because he will. Are you prepared to go? even if that means leaving the familiar and the comfortable for whatever may come our way. But this is something I have to choose on a daily basis. Let's follow Jesus when he calls. Because who knows the amazing life of fullness, of life, of love, of joy, of peace, and every other adjective I can think of. Let's not miss out on that because we just want to feel comfortable.